So we need to talk about the formation of the Dutch Empire. This is going to be the empire that's going to replace the Spanish as the dominant world power in the 1600s. Okay. To start off, we need to look at the origins of this. Okay. Um, the Netherlands or Holland, um, or the Dutch republics, it's all the same. Um, they during the 1500s they were part of Spain. Okay. Now, how the heck does that happen is the real question, which is really confusing. Uh, you got to look at the understanding of European history. So let's back up here. Okay. The Netherlands, these kind of various Dutch little provinces, were actually part of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. Now, in 1516, Charles V is crowned King of Spain. Okay. He was the Edict of Worms, Charles V. Okay. So we've talked about him before. Okay. His grandfather dies 1519. Okay. And he's named Holy Roman Emperor. Okay. So now he is King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor. So basically all of quote unquote the empire is part of Spain now, including the Netherlands. Okay. Um, and the provinces do not like this. Okay. They adopt Protestantism. Okay. Um, with this idea that they like this whole Martin Luther thing, this whole idea that faith says they buy into, but it's also this idea that uh, you have these corrupt institutions far away. Okay, um, that really struck a chord with them. Martin Luther was big about the Catholic Church all the way down in Rome is corrupt, ruling from far away. They don't really care what's happening in Germany. Okay, um, the Spanish feel the same way, or excuse me, the Dutch feel the same way about the Spanish. Okay. As one historian puts it, the ideas of Martin Luther and John Calvin and others who emphasized the institutional corruption of distant political rulers and the spiritual importance of the individual fell on fertile ground in these heavily urbanized areas and helped Protestantism embed deep roots in the region. Economic and religious persecution proved a powerful cocktail for fomenting revolt and eventually led to the Union of Utrecht of 1581, a declaration of independence which became the Union of Seven Provinces, effectively the Dutch Republic. Okay, so basically they kind of reject Spain, sign this Union of Utrecht, in which these small kind of little individual provinces form a Dutch Republic, in which they pick representatives to represent their little provinces. Okay, um, the Spanish responded with a show of force. Okay, they basically are going to put an embargo on the Netherlands so they can't trade. As one historian puts it, okay, um, the Spanish responded with a show of force together with an embargo on trade across the Low Countries that began in 1585. The aim was to starve the rebel provinces and cities of oxygen and force them into submission. As is so often the case, when sanctions are put in place, the result was the opposite. Faced with little alternative, the separatists went on the offensive. The only way to survive was to use every ounce of knowledge, skill, and expertise that had their advantage. It was time to turn the tables. Okay, so basically, kind of what happens here is they're already urban. They put this blockade in. Okay, um, the Dutch can't sell their surplus crops. Okay, so that's only going to further lead to more urbanization because that means people in kind of these rural communities, if they're not growing more, migrate to these urban centers. Okay, this migration to these urban centers leads to urbanization. You now have a collection of capital in these urban centers and a collection of various talents in these urban centers. Okay, so when they lift the blockade, the Dutch basically realize, hey, look, if we are going to defend our sovereignty, we must become a maritime empire. Okay. And they are smart. They do their homework. They look at what Portugal did. They look at what Spain did. They gathered all the maps. Okay. They figured out all these various things. They basically gathered as much knowledge as they could. Okay. Um, they do send kind of one boat out, one kind of expedition out that returns 1597, and it makes a profit of some 400%. So the Dutch know that this is going to be extremely successful if they get involved in this. Okay. The issue is they're a newly formed country. They don't have the tax revenues to turn around and build a gigantic navy. So the question is, how are they going to pull this off? And this is where the part where you had all these people move to these cities with extra money becomes important. Okay. Basically, they're going to form a joint stock company. Okay. Now, it's not the first joint stock company, but it's going to be the most famous and the one that is the most successful. The first. Okay. What is a joint stock company? To explain that, we need to explain what stock is. Okay. Stock is percent ownership in a company. So when you buy a stock in a company, you own a percentage of that company. And when that company makes a profit, you get paid dividends, which basically means you get paid a portion of that profit. So these joint stock companies, what you would do is you'd buy stock in it, and they would take that money to go buy boats, to buy crews, to set out and sail. Okay. And once those boats sailed and purchased spices or sugar and then returned and sold those items, you would be paid a percentage of your investment, right? You'd be paid kind of back the money that you invested and some based on how well they did, okay? And basically what you see here is kind of like every Dutchman is going to do this because they tie it to patriotism, right? They're all going to invest in this joint stock company that is known as the Dutch East India Company, okay? The literal name for it in Dutch is Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. Okay, so you just need to know it's the Dutch East India Company, but for the acronym for it is VOC. Okay, so if you're writing, you need to write Dutch East India Company and then the acronym VOC, and then after that, you can just refer to it as the VOC. The government gives it a charter in 1602. The company then starts a sister company, the West-Indische Company. Okay. But together, we're just going to call both of them the Dutch East India Company. And basically, what does that mean? They're going to trade in East Indies, aka Spice Islands, the Indian Ocean. They're also going to trade in the West Indies, aka the Caribbean. Okay. So again, basically, this is all private Dutch individuals that are financing this. Okay. Because they realize the only way we're going to compete against Spain is if we kind of all pull our natural resources and kind of start what really is kind of the world's first corporation, or one of the world's first corporations here. Okay, this is really where we see the importance. The Dutch remain tied to the principle of free trade. Okay, they're going to trade with anyone and everyone. They're not adopting mercantilism. Okay, that's going to be a large reason why they are extremely successful in doing this. Okay. This company is also going to have this new type of ship. They're going to make some maritime advances known as the flutes. Okay, it's kind of like a pear-shaped ship with kind of like a very large back end and kind of more narrow front end. It basically increased the carrying capacity of the hull, so it could carry more items. It had a smaller crew. Okay, and you basically see during the 17th century, the Dutch are going to develop one of the world's largest merchant fleets with some 16,000 different vessels. Okay, and this is not taxpayer dollars that are doing this. This is mom and dad or grandpa and grandpa that have bought stock in this joint company. Okay, so the Dutch themselves have invested in this and are allowing for this to happen. Okay, and this is really, we say that the Dutch are going to replace the Spanish as the dominant world power. The Dutch are going to replace the Spanish as the dominant world power. By that, we really mean it's the Dutch East India Company. Okay, but the line between governance and corporations is going to become extremely blurred here. Okay, the Dutch East India Company is technically a private company. It is technically not part of the Dutch government at all whatsoever. Okay, but in the 1602 charter, the Dutch government is going to give it a large amount of powers that basically kind of make it a pseudo or a de facto government. Okay, the Dutch East India Company has the power to make war. It has the power to build forts, and it has the power to make treaties, okay? All with the ultimate goal of monopolizing trade, okay? If they have the power to make war, that means the Dutch East India Company has a private army, okay? An army of mercenaries. You probably have seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, not the first one when they're in red coats. Well, that would be the British Empire, but the second one when they're in blue coats, that's one of these joint stock companies. Okay, I actually believe it's the VOC if my memory serves me correct. The goal wasn't competition. The goal was to completely displace and get rid of their opposition. And they're going to be extremely successful in doing this through violence and the use of arms. In 1605, they will kick Portugal out of the Spice Islands. By 1641, they will have taken Malacca and controlled the Straits of Malacca, also kicking the Portuguese out. 1658, they take Ceylon. 1663, they make Cochin. Okay, basically, Cochin becomes the capital of the Dutch Malabar Coast, which is basically this western kind of portion of India here. Okay, so they are also basically setting up kind of a trade post-empire. Okay, by 1669, they have taken Makassar, and basically, what does that mean? In 1669, they have basically established a monopoly over the spice trade. So they have succeeded where Portugal failed. Okay, this expansion is not just taking place in Asia. Okay, this is also taking in Africa. In 1637, they begin to build a series of forts in Ghana. This brings them to dominate the gold trade. Okay, again, the Mali Empire has collapsed. This also brings them to be involved in the slave trade. In 1652, on the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, they established Cape Town, which is Cape Colony. It starts as a Dutch colony. This is very important because this is eventually what is going to end up becoming part of the Boer republics. Okay, the company is concerned about interracial clashes. So they are actually going to pass a series of segregation laws. Okay, that's hugely important because the trajectory of where this is going is this is the state that's eventually going to implement apartheid. Okay, the local tribes in these areas were nomadic. They were raising cattle. Cattle needs to roam and eat the grass. Where these Dutch colonizers came and they were establishing farms to grow food, with the idea that the southern tip of Africa, if you got these boats that are sailing around it to get to India, this would be a great point to kind of have a food supply, fresh water supply in case these ships needed to resupply or kind of harbor to repair. Okay, so they're establishing this whole colony to grow food and to kind of stay there, and that's at odds with the local population of nomads. So what happens is the Dutch kind of push the Africans further into the interior as they expand, and the company passes a series of laws that prevent the mixing of these races. Okay, keep in mind, passing laws sounds like a government. They're not a government, but they're acting like one. Okay, you also see in the West Indies, they will take some colonies in that area, but you primarily see what gives them the advantage, the monopoly over the sugar trade is they're using Dutch ships to transport the majority of their products back to Europe. Okay, this rise in wealth that is being generated by this company is going to really lead to kind of this consumer economy. Okay, the three big cities that develop, kind of really begin to urbanize under the Spanish embargo is Antwerp, Ghent, and Bruges. Okay, these are also the three kind of same urban centers that you see a lot of consumerism. You have the development of consumer economy. The first thing that we're going to look at that starts being made for consumption by Dutch consumers is known as Delftware. Okay, this is kind of circa 1640 and on. Okay, basically, this is a Dutch copy of the Chinese porcelain, the blue and white porcelain. You see bottom right here. This is a picture of a Delftware that exists to this day that dates back to 1680. It's in the Art Institute of Chicago. It gets the nickname because it's made primarily around the city in the Netherlands of Delft. So they basically realized, hey, look, it's only an expert in Chinese antiquities that would be able to spot this as a forgery. Okay, so you got all these middle class people that can't afford the real Chinese porcelain; it's too expensive. So if we kind of create these knockoff copies of it, these people will buy them in large quantities, and that's exactly what exists during that time period. Okay, it's also going to lead to some of the very famous time period in art. Okay, if you look at the 17th century alone, it's estimated that some 3 million different paintings are going to be created in response to this consumer economy of them wanting to buy artwork to hang in their homes. Okay, two of the world's most famous artists emerged during this. The first being Rembrandt. Okay, you see this bottom left here. This is one of his most famous paintings, known as The Night Watch. The next one is Vermeer. Okay, this is one of his most paintings. The Girl with the Pearl Earrings. Okay, where are the pearls coming from? The New World, right? So you really see it's going to be the Dutch Empire in the 1600s that are really going to kind of run things and really kind of become this dominant factor as they're really kind of monopolizing and controlling the trade during this time period.